Evening, and thank you for coming. My name is Franca Palazzo, and I'm the Executive Director of the Internet Society. Before we start, I just want to give you a very brief overview of who we are and what we do. Our president, Lynn Hamilton, is here and will be coming up after the panel discussion to give you a bit more detail. The Internet Society Canada chapter is part of a global organization with 160 chapters across the world. It was founded by the fathers of the internet, Vint Cerf and Bob Kahn, as well as many other internet pioneers who recognized that the internet would become critical infrastructure, complex and difficult to govern. The Internet Society Canada chapter advocates on behalf of Canadian citizens for an affordable, accessible, and open internet. So now I would like to take the opportunity to thank our sponsors. Our gold sponsor is the Internet Society North America chapter, or region bureau. Mark Buell is the bureau chief, and he's a huge supporter of our chapter. And I would especially like to thank our presenting sponsor, Intuit. We have Rodney McDonald here, who is head of global policy for Intuit Canada and Intuit France. And I'd like to invite him up to say a few words.
Thanks, Franca. Yes. This would have looked a lot more polished with a podium, but it'll have to be what it'll be. So it's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to sponsor the Internet Society. And I promise this sermon will not last more than 5 minutes, so just so you know. So I have no special insights into the unknown frontiers of AI, and I'm not going to be the guy in the Terminator movie who yells, "I told you it was a bad idea," as he's being disintegrated. I'll happily defer that glory to my fellow panelists, or the panelists. So what I can tell you is that Intuit spends a lot of time thinking about how people work and how we can use technology to create a platform to make their financial lives more productive. And we're probably best known by our big brands, TurboTax, Mint, and QuickBooks, for anyone who's not familiar with our corporate name. And we've shifted our sort of technological imagination radically since 1983 when we were founded. Back then, a better financial experience was something as simple as being able to print a valid check off your dot matrix printer, which you still had to put in the mail and send somewhere. You can laugh, but that was our killer app at the time in 1983. So the thinking behind AI was still taking shape, and the technology itself was strictly the stuff of science fiction. When I was preparing for this, I thought it might be nice to look at what real futurists were saying back in 1983, or back in 1980, and the New York Times sat down with its own panel of futurists to look at the next millennium, and one of them made this prediction. Robots will tackle menial chores. Maids, however, will probably persist. You can program a vacuum cleaner to retrace its steps, but if the baby gets in the way, too bad for the baby. That's right, AI was so far-fetched they couldn't even wrap their heads around the Roomba. The technology has come a long way since then, and so have we as a company. Today, we're fully invested in AI to drive every part of our platform, and as we learn what AI means, our business model is also becoming more intelligent. Back in about 2013, we had a huge shift in strategy from being a closed platform, a closed desktop provider of solutions, and trying to predict what businesses needed and wanted and figure out what was in our wheelhouse and develop and sell that, to an open platform AI-driven model over the past 5 years that has allowed close to 1,000 apps to be developed on top of our platform to leverage our small business data insights and create innovative solutions to address the needs of what small businesses want. So, like I said, in 2013, when we made our data available, we had 2 apps at the end of that year, and this year we're approaching 1,000. So instead of trying to be all things to all people, Intuit focuses on the things we do best to deliver value to our customers. We're connecting people, for example, our key core clients of chartered accountants with our other core clients of small businesses to help accountants become advisors and pull out insights from the data instead of just being number crunchers. So it's really revolutionizing that profession. So, and then as we connect those small businesses, we're actually helping FIs leverage the data of their books to help them gain access to credit facilities that the big FIs wouldn't normally give them because they don't have the same level of insight into how that small business is doing. And that partnership is now so widespread that we're partnered with 20,000 financial institutions globally. So that's really happened in the past 5 years, and all because we've shifted our mindset to be more open. I'm going to skip some of my bullet points here, but so I just want to say that this shift in strategy, I think for this room doesn't sound radical, but for a lot of big tech players from the Valley, they're still trying to protect their data. We certainly see in the Canadian financial services sector, the big FIs are still trying to protect your transaction data as their own. And that's really limiting the kind of magic that can happen when you take on sort of an app store mentality. And we no longer want to hoard that data. In fact, we don't even think of that data as ours, but it's the consumers who let us use it. And we understand how much more valuable data can be when it's open. Open data can provide an innovative platform to differentiate the use cases of what each small business wants. So I doubt that any of this was in the long-term plan of our founders back in 1983, but once they got over their fear of losing their children to an AI-driven vacuum cleaner, I'm sure if they could have conceived of it, they would have approved. So I look forward to the rest of the discussion. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Rodney, and thank you again for your support. And now I'm super excited to introduce our keynote, Hilary Hartley, who is Chief Digital Officer and Deputy Minister at the Province of Ontario.
Is this long enough to wander? Excellent. I too had some prepared remarks, but I think I'm going to wing it, so I apologize in advance. Hi, folks. I'm Hilary. I am the province's first Chief Digital Officer, and I am the Deputy Minister of Consumer Services, which means that I have the privilege of overseeing the teams that are the Ontario Digital Service Ontario, of which there are a few here tonight, so thanks for coming out, folks. Service Ontario, Consumer Protection Ontario, and the Open Government Office. And that sort of, that addition to my original job spec happened in June. So it's been a fun summer and a fun fall. Busy, new minister just a couple weeks ago. And, but the crux of what is happening at the province right now is that they want to be different. They don't want to be seen as government as usual. They are challenging us to think differently. It is kind of a very conservative notion to, of government, sort of run government like a business. And it's not so much that, as much as how can we bring some of the ways that you all who are in the private sector or at nonprofits, wrestling with tight budgets, how do we bring some of that mentality, some of that think fast, some of that just start? How do we just get started into government? And so it's it's a very, very exciting time. Like the prior speaker, I won't pretend to be an AI scholar. I know this much about AI. And I also know that lots of things are often conflated into AI. So whether we're talking about natural language processing, or whether we're talking about robotics and automation, or sort of any number of things, you kind of talk about AI in general. It feels a little bit like how folks talk about digital. I hate the word digital, honestly. It's too limiting because people think, oh, you're just doing the computer stuff. When we first got started in the US, I came from the US, I helped build a team there. It was kind of nice to be in disguise honestly, to be sort of the change agents, but we were just the computer people. So it's easy to ask the computer people for help. But then you're able to kind of sneak in and really widen their perspective on what you mean by digital. Yes, it means we'll probably deliver something that ends up on here, hopefully, and on other devices as well. But it also really fundamentally means that we are, going back to how I started, we are changing how we approach getting to the outcomes that are in front of us. We're trying to, ask folks, I know we've always done it this way, but do we have to? Do we have to do it that way? And if so, show me, in the legislation or the regulation or whatever it is. Show me, and then maybe we can figure out how to change that. But digital really is, it's about how do we deliver in the internet era, where all of your expectations have absolutely raised, gotten extremely high over the past few years, where not only can, I buy a book online. How long was that the example that everybody went to? Everybody needs to be like Amazon. We can buy books online now. But you can do anything online now, literally almost anything. And government, because we are here for the people, and we are here 7/24, and we need to be here 7/24. Government can no longer sort of be an exception to that. We have to be trying to keep up, trying to be on the forefront, trying to experiment and push ourselves to ask those questions about how do we approach this thing differently. We're in the service delivery business. And so how do we deliver services effectively focused on you, focused on the people of Ontario? Our digital action plan that we released in February is called Start with Users, Deliver Together. And to me, whether you like that word or not, users, we wrestled with it. But people are really at the heart of what I'm talking about when I talk about digital transformation. I just touched my chest and forgot that I even had this pin on. Users first. People are at the heart of this transformation. How do we, when trying to deliver simpler, faster, better services, keep you, the folks who need the information, who need to complete the transaction, at the heart of how we do that? It's not as easy as it sounds. And I think when we talk about AI, the future of employment, the future of how we create and enable and empower teams to do things simpler, faster, and better, we've got to stay focused on people. So that, I think, is my challenge to those of you wrestling with what are going to be some pretty hairy, thorny decisions, not just in terms of how you may be implementing NLP or automation or any number of things. And if you're in the service delivery business, if you're not investing in one of those areas, you're already behind, and you should be. But how do we wrestle with those hard questions of keeping people at the center of how we move forward with those strategies? Because at the risk of offending anyone, people are dumb. I'm dumb. I have made I have made so many decisions out of convenience, because it is so easy to get what I want from this thing. And some of that is destined to come back and bite me in the butt. I think we have to be thinking about privacy. We have to be thinking about the breadth of data that we have access to and are creating. And we have to do that with each and every one of you at the center of those decisions. So that's my challenge. That's my challenge when I talk about digital, when we talk about digital first at the province. And I think as we talk about any of this future proofing of our services, of our programs, of our products, we have to do it with people at the center. So thank you for being here tonight. Thanks for wrestling with some of these hard questions. And thanks to the experts that are going to be up here, schooling myself and hopefully some of you as well, because we need your big brains helping us wrestle with these questions. They're important questions. I put a challenge out to my team last year because I very much believe that if we're going to be a digital first organization, we also have to challenge ourselves to try to be more open and transparent, using open source, open standards, open data. And I think that that's going to be a huge factor in the AI algorithm conversation. So I put a challenge out to my team to try to do one project in the open, from start to finish, open source this year. I think a similar challenge when you're talking about whether it's NLP or automation or any number of things. Take a look at what your organization does. Choose one thing that you hate to do, honestly, and automate it. Start with something simple. Find that one thing that would be an easy win, so to speak, an easy thing to strip out and start to play with it. Start to understand what's involved, because you're absolutely going to learn. You're absolutely going to stumble probably, and all of those things are just going to make this whole conversation better and go forward. So thank you again. Thanks, Franca, and I look forward to the panel.
Thank you, Hillary. Okay, so we're going to move to our panel discussion now. So if I could ask the panelists to come up. I'd like to introduce our moderator, Jeremy Depot, who is a science and technology policy strategist, and I will let him take it from here. If you want to tweet, #ShapeTomorrow.
You don't want to be in the middle.
Look at your talk. It's amazing. Hey? Dismissing my best. Mandy Ranahan. Nice to meet you.
I know.
Regan. I got it this time.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Okay, great. Well, yeah, a little bit louder. I can talk loud. Listen, thanks you all for coming and participating today. We've got a great panel of tremendous expertise and experience, and it's a great opportunity to talk about a subject that's important for us today and is including or evolving to be continually important as we move forward with this, the advances in this technology. In your packages, you have biographies. With the number of panelists that we have, we're going to skip intros and jump right into the discussion, and in order to make best use of time. Our objective today is really to look at what Canada needs to do to benefit from the shifting employment landscape as it relates to the utilization of new artificial intelligence techniques and the methods that are evolving as we speak. So there's the today and what we're experiencing, and there's tomorrow. So what I thought we should do to kick off is just frame the discussion a little bit. And to do that, I'm going to ask Regan to talk a little bit about what is meant by artificial intelligence. It's a term that was developed, I think, in the 1953. Then there was the 80s. We had Deep Blue. We had chess contests and all kinds of things, and now we're at a much deeper level of neural networks and rule-based networks, and because it's such an umbrella term and so much hype around it, I wonder if you could kind of ground us a little bit in terms of what you see is meant by artificial intelligence in today's context?
So that's a big question. I'll start. I'm Regan Watts. I lead a group at IBM Canada responsible for innovation, but also corporate citizenship and government regulatory affairs. So I actually think about this issue wearing two hats. One on the innovation side, and that's work we do with universities and colleges to accelerate research, of which AI is a part of it, as well as work with startups, about 1,000 startups a year that we engage AI and other things. And then I wear the public policy hat from a GR perspective. So I'm going to be as quick and succinct as I can, knowing that there's 7 of us who have something to say tonight. So I'll talk about what most people hear, and you kind of referred to it in your question. AI for IBM is Watson, and that is our AI platform. It played chess, and it competed in Jeopardy, but it's other things too. Just today, Lexus released a new commercial that was written by Watson. A couple years ago at the Met Gala in New York, Watson designed a dress that one of the participants wore on the red carpet. So Watson actually in AI means lots of different things. But for us, the term AI, we think about it slightly differently in the context that we think of it as augmented intelligence, not artificial intelligence, because we think AI has a role, but ultimately people, and Hillary talked about this in remarks, we think people have to be at the core of the technology and using it. And we also use the term cognitive, which is learning. So that's an IBM term, but AI is more of an industry or popular culture vernacular. But for us, we think AI as an augmenter of work that people do that will learn, whether it's natural language processing, for example, or helping mining companies mine more efficiently, or designing commercials. AI is a tool that uses technology and algorithms and all that goes into making a hamster wheel to create output that, again, humans at the other end interact with, use, and deploy in their businesses or their marketplace.
Thank you very much. I have to note it's great to have such a diverse panel because I don't know if you're aware, but JFK used to do something where he'd bring a lot of people in a room that had very diverse perspectives. And he did that because he wanted to get everybody, he wanted to have a really roundabout insight. And he did that during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And we all know that the outcome ended up to be very good at the end of the day. And it's symbolic to me in terms of why it's valuable to have diversity in opinions. And so first I was kind of 7 of us, but then now I'm thinking this is really good. So yeah. So
He was kind of looking at me, to be honest.
So yeah. So yeah, over to you, Mandy. So
voted off.
Yeah, right. Oh, shit.
You're ripping stuff apart. You're putting it back together to make it beautiful again. Your rubber hits the road on what AI is. What does it mean to you?
Well, when you look at a diversified opinion, you brought it tonight, sitting in the middle of everybody here. So if you didn't read the document, I'm Mandy Ranahan, and I'm known as the Blue Collar CEO. And so what I'm doing is bridging the gap between the white and the blue collars so that everybody understands the real importance of that and where it's been lost for many, 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 many centuries. And so, yes, I do rip things apart, and I do put them back together, but here's the more important part. Today, I spoke to 1 billion young people in the Durham region with a ball cap on, a T-shirt on, and that said, Blue Collar Intelligence on the back. And they all looked at me, and I said, you've never seen intelligence attached to blue collar, have you? And they looked, and they were like, we've never really seen the name blue collar, to be quite honest. So the whole idea is that my company, Freshco, not the grocery store, but we don't have time for that, is that we are really a company that's defining technology in a field, in an area that truly has never seen anything but manual labor being its thing. And so we had one of our young women walk out today in an exoskeleton suit at 121 pounds, cute as a button, and she was fiery. The reality is that we worked with Lockheed Martin to develop this. They developed it. We just helped them figure out how it would work in construction. And so we brought it in, and you know, you could see the young guys and the girls going, wow, this is awesome. I want to work for you. You know, and so at that moment, when you look at AI, the industry that I'm in is very behind in what, in I guess in the fields that you guys are in. But when you look at AI and robotics, which this would be one, they go hand in hand. And our industry is like the brawn of AI. And the algorithm behind AI, if you talk about our friend, what was his name, Harold? Winston. Whatever.
Close enough.
The whole idea is that he's the brain behind the brawn in the industry that makes the robotics work. So from my perspective, I'm trying to make people see that at the end of the day, whether you are in the white-collar industry or in the blue-collar industry, we need to start talking a lot more to see a lot better things happen. Because there's a perception out there that's been deadly socially and to our economy. And I'm out there fixing that. And with a drink, it will even get better later. Just want to let you know that.
With the number of AI platforms out there, I bet you there is one named Harold.
Yeah.
So,
Or Winston.
or Winston.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. So Vivian, you're working in the legal field. We've talked a little bit about the impact of AI in your work. What's your perspective on what it means in terms of the work that you're doing?
It's funny that you ask that because I get that quite a bit at work. Lawyers are still trying to figure out what AI means in our practice, but in the most basic form, for us, from the legal perspective, artificial intelligence is the use of some system to mimic human behavior or human thought processing to generate a more efficient, generally cost-beneficial outcome. So that's how we think of it, and then once we really start talking, we'll see some of the examples that we're seeing in the legal profession, both in the court and outside of the court, and how we help our clients. My notes fell. Yeah, I guess not. Thanks. But yeah, we'll see how artificial intelligence is being used within the legal profession, but how we're also helping our clients use it with a legal mind frame.
Great, thank you. Tim, in the context of what is unique to Canada's social values and economy, how do you see our competitive situation from a global perspective today and maybe in comparison to 3 to 5 years? And I asked that question in light of, I look at China. There's a great book by Kai-Fu Lee who talks about China's Sputnik moment. They've set standard or goals for 2020, 2025, and then by 2030 they see themselves as being the center of AI global innovation. And then we have the US that is trying to maintain its leadership. Where are we? What are some of the advantages? And how do we contextualize ourselves in where there are superpowers, large economies that are taking a lot of ownership over AI innovation? Canada needs to probably, and please challenge me if I'm wrong, but we probably need to niche ourselves based on what our strengths are, our economic strengths. How do you kind of see that? And there's a couple questions in one.
Yeah, that's actually quite a few pretty big questions. And I would
Welcome to the club.
Just start with the first one.
But I'll make a few observations. I mean, obviously, this is a truly global phenomenon. I mean, you've got not just AI, but the whole confluence of several different new technologies. You've got big data, you've got Internet of Things, you've got cloud computing, you've got various new elements of robotics and so on. And all these things are kind of hitting at the same time. And it's not even just the one technology, it's the way that the different technologies kind of get mixed and matched. And you know, we're seeing across a whole range of different sectors of the economy that these are leading to big changes in how things are done. And I think the thing to keep in mind is it's not just a matter of like doing the same things more efficiently and more cheaply. It's a question of actually coming up with new products that didn't exist before and that we didn't even know we needed or that we wanted. And we see this pattern, you know, and I think we've only just started to see the beginning of it. Now, of course, this is you know, big subject of discussion internationally. I mean, this year Canada was in the presidency of the G7, and it was you know, not AI specifically, but the future of work, you know, given all the technological changes, was one of the big topics for the G7 this year. It was also one of the big topics for Argentina's presidency of the G20, which, you know, includes the emerging market economies like China and India, as well as the advanced economies. And so, I mean, this is all a big you know, it's a big topic. I guess maybe you know, starting point is a lot of the discussion, I think, is very simplistic. There's a sort of notion of, well, with AI, nobody will have a job in 20 years' time. Everything will be done by the machines. And I mean, ironically, actually, the reason that we need a lot of this stuff is because we're currently facing precisely the opposite problem. I mean, our populations are aging. We're short of a lot of critical skills, and we're short of skilled blue-collar like trades, but we're also short of a lot of the more technical skills. And so, you know, we're seeing, you know, in many of the advanced economies, growth rates are slowing down, and precisely because of this sort of aging of the population. And in Canada, we've seen our you know, the same sort of thing. We've seen the baby boomers sort of marching off into retirement, and a lot of their skills with them. And we've also seen that productivity growth hasn't kind of picked up to compensate. In fact, on the contrary, productivity has been growing more slowly than it was a couple of decades ago. And so really, you know, the conclusion would be that we really need to have new technologies that will help make us all more productive. And when you think about AI in that context, you know, economists have talked about it doesn't make everything. It doesn't automate everything. It replaces a particular set of skills, which are what University of Toronto professor Joshua Gantz talks about prediction machines. You know, basically that AI makes it much easier to predict stuff, and that's a part of so many different things that we do. And of course, what that means is that anything involving prediction gets cheaper, and people see their jobs replaced. But anything that complements prediction, which things involving judgment, that involve personal touches, that involve you know, various things that require the human presence. I mean, those things all become more valuable. And so, you know, in that context, you know, we can think of where Canada is strong. You know, we have, of course, you know, starting point. We have populations that are very educated, that have skills that require, you know, many of the hard and soft skills that are needed to invent new stuff. But I think the important thing is also not just the invention part, but it's the adoption. Like how are these new technologies going to sort of complement the things we've already got? And I think that there are some you know, there's some strengths there as well. You know, a lot of the you know, Canadian workforce also has a lot of those soft skills, which are ones that are going to become increasingly valuable as these technologies continue to advance.
Thank you very much for handling my many questions in one.
That was amazing.
Fawad, you're in the center and working with this supercluster, the AI supercluster. With your experience with that, how would you look at that question in terms of how we're doing now, where we could go? What's the supercluster kind of centering its activities on?
Thank you. So just by way of background, I do executive search and we're seeing the cross-section of talent and technology becoming more and more top of mind for boards and CEOs. I just want to build on one point that you just made around invention and adoption. Those are two different facets you can take when it comes to applying AI. And when it comes to invention, we did a lot of research around where does Canada have a seat at the table, and that's based on the institutions we have, the education system we have, the justice system we have. All these elements allow you to invent things. And if I were to take us back a few years, RIM was an invention, like we created that, right? But then the journey to commercialization is where we falter. That's where we need an opportunity to really be able to take it to the global scale. What happens in between is, no offense to Amazon, but big organizations from the US are able to take that talent and give them bigger opportunities elsewhere. And we lose that opportunity here in Canada. And so there's a lot of like-minded people who are saying, yes, we need Amazon and Googles of the world to be here. So they help us breed that talent. But at the end of the day, we need our own ecosystem, our own localized ecosystem that is funded by the government, partly, and then partly funded by the industry. So industry puts money where their mouth is. And that takes us to adoption. How does Canada not only invent these things, but also adopt these elements? And that's where Scale AI is, and the reason that was mentioned was because our firm is doing the executive team for that supercluster. The intent of this supercluster is to give Canada that opportunity where industry is bringing in roughly about $700 million across Ontario and Quebec for the most part, and government is putting in $250 million. And this is supposed to be spent in joint projects, and the idea is you take initiatives that these organizations were going to run anyways, and you subsidize them, but the key is the projects need to be run by Canadian organizations. And eventually, over the next few years, these organizations, these localized companies keep on getting more and more funding through this construct, and they become commercialized globally. So we see an opportunity for Canada to continue on that spectrum, but when we sit in Toronto, it's easy for us to kind of feel like, oh, this is the hub of AI. The reality is we're quite small. We have an opportunity, but we're still quite small. And China and the US and Europe, although Europe is lacking because of their data issues, because they don't have access to that data the way China and the US is enabling. We have an opportunity, but we could lose it if we don't have the right infrastructure in place.
Great, thank you very much. I'll just ask everybody to speak into the microphone because we do have recording here and the audience. It's a big room, so appreciate that. Sunil, if you could pick up on that a little bit and your perspective on this discussion.
Sure.
And the social values
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'll
as well.
pivot to the social side of this a little more. I mean, a big part of this conversation is future of work. A couple of people have mentioned already. I mean, I think we need to take a step back and think about the present day of work. I mean, we tend to get kind of insulated. The folks in this room, people on this panel, don't really see the struggles that many people in Canada are actually experiencing when it comes to the present day of work. I mean, if you look at the statistics in the past 20 years, in Ontario, if you're a non-management, non-professional worker, you've had zero wage growth adjusted for inflation over the past 20 years. Income inequality is at record highs across advanced economies, including Canada, the US, most of Western Europe. 6 million Canadians can't afford to visit their dentist due to cost pressures. Mental health issues cost the economy $30 to $50 billion a year. So it's wonderful to talk about AI. It's great that we've got the Vector Institute and all these other investments coming online. But we've already seen over the past 30 to 40 years that significant economic growth in Canada has not translated to opportunity for 30 to 40% of the population, I would conservatively estimate. So if we're thinking about these new economic opportunities going forward, the question shouldn't be, are they there or not? Obviously, we want to pursue them, but the question becomes a distribution issue. How do we make sure that the opportunities afforded by these new technologies are distributed fairly throughout society, and we're not just contributing to increased inequality, the top 1%, the top 10% continuing to get outsized gains of these economic opportunities. And I think I fear that's the situation we're in. We're basically kind of continuing our branch plant mentality in Canada of let's attract some multinationals to the country. We'll get some decent paying jobs, but we're not owning any of the IP, any of the intangibles that are being created here. They're all being rooted back to Silicon Valley, back to other countries. So I think we need to kind of take a hard look at where are we investing public funds? Is this something that's going to benefit Canadians in the long term? And I think a second kind of separate point there is there are huge questions around governance and ethics in the AI space, and Canada has an opportunity to lead there. I mean, I don't think the US and China are really paying much attention to those issues, to be honest. So if Canada wants to be a leader in AI anywhere, it's on ethics, it's on governance, it's how do we make systems that work fairly for everybody and don't just work for kind of the oligarchs and the elite in Silicon Valley. So I'd say that would be kind of one comparative advantage we potentially possess, rather than kind of saying we're investing 100 million here, 100 million here. I mean, MIT invested $1 billion last week in its AI research fund. I mean, that blows the entire public funding of Canada out of the water. That's one private institution in the country. So I think we're not going to outspend them. We're not going to out-talent them in terms of people. China and India are going to destroy us in terms of the amount of software engineers that they're going to produce in the next 10 to 20 years. So I think we need to kind of be thoughtful and try and help shape a future for the world that all of us want to live in.
Thanks, Sunil. Steve, you're right in the middle of it. You're deploying, in many fronts. You're seeing the opportunities for your business. How do you look at that question of economic advantage, socio-economic advantage?
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. Thanks to the organizers for having me here and everyone on the panel. So I'm with Amazon, and I mean, pardon me?
I'm brave.
Sure. Canada's been a great place for us to do business and to grow. And people have raised valid questions already tonight, and I think those are the right questions to be asking. From my perspective, I don't think it's mutually exclusive to have investment from global companies and the need to build for Canada to build its own successful tech enterprises and IP and skills. Canada's a tremendously skilled has a tremendously skilled workforce, and that's what is attracting companies like Amazon. And we have a significant office here in Toronto, a significant and growing office in Vancouver as well. And the skills part and the graduates that are coming out of Waterloo, U of T, UBC, they're very highly skilled, highly sought after. I'm a Canadian. I'm very proud that we're able to offer these Silicon Valley jobs here in Toronto, in Vancouver, in Canada, and so when they graduate from University of Waterloo, that brain drain, now they have an option to stay at home or they have an option to come back home. But I mean, we're hiring a lot. Everybody's hiring a lot. There are not enough engineers, and that's not a surprise to anyone. The government's made some very smart moves in terms of immigration with the global skills strategy, bringing very talented people to Canada. But I think education is the key component that we need to look at, and we're really focused on that, both from a K-12 perspective and post-secondary. Was really proud this summer. We made a $500,000 donation to Canada Learning Code, formerly known as Ladies Learning Code, an amazing organization, for them to focus on their K-12 programs and have additional code mobiles, which are these vans that they drive around the country, bringing IT and computer science education to students that may not be able to access that where they live. That's really important, because if we don't reach these students young, and I'm talking about kindergarten, they're going to grow older and think, well, this isn't for me, this coding stuff, I don't know it. And then by the time they need to choose their major, they're not even looking at it. And we do need to be encouraging more Canadians to get into computer science, and that as a real core part of our curriculum across the country. And Canada Learning Code's really leading the work on developing a K-12 framework nationally. But then just very quickly at the post-secondary level as well. One thing that we've seen is a huge marker for success for new engineers that we're hiring is having done co-op or integrated work learning. And that's something that we're really working on promoting more. I think if we can get, Waterloo has a fantastic program, and that's a large part of their success. And I think we need to look at how we can bring that to other schools, and that we can be increasing the overall number of successful graduates, because the skills that they come out of, if they've had that opportunity, really differentiate them when they're entering the workforce.
Thanks, Steve. Vivian, we've seen some examples with the deployment of AI early on, and there has been some biases, some that have contributed to sexual or racial discrimination. You've written about some of those cases. In terms of the people being involved in this process, what, based on your legal and policy experience so far, how is employment shifting with AI, based on kind of the some of the experiences that we've had, and some companies are even putting in ethical principles. I wonder if you could share with us a little bit on that.
Sure. So I guess before I go into the examples, I think one important thing to keep in mind is when we're talking about the bias question, we're looking at the quality of the data involved. You refer to examples. We've had discussions about some examples in the media, including Amazon's hiring algorithm. And really all of those biases, whether it's gender bias, racial bias, it goes back to the quality of the data. And you need to think about, what is the end goal? What are we trying to achieve by using this algorithm? And the data that you will select will reflect whether or not you're able to achieve that end goal. That being said, if we're talking specifically within the legal context, we're still seeing people playing a role in the use of AI. So I'm a litigator. We use AI for e-discovery. So we're going through hundreds to thousands to hundreds of thousands of documents on complex commercial files, and we're using algorithms to process these documents to find viable or quality documents that will be useful and are legally defensible when we're actually using them in the course of an arbitration, in the course of a trial. At our firm, we actually have an in-house e-discovery firm or a team known as MT3. So what they do is it's a team of both software engineers and lawyers who are trained to look at these documents, create algorithms, and deploy them. And they're working with lawyers who are not, as tech savvy or as, knowledgeable about artificial intelligence to review these documents and find what works for them in terms of production of documents for discovery and all of that. In terms of the corporate side, we're also using artificial intelligence for corporate due diligence. So Kira is a software program that's it was created in Toronto, I believe. Like, they have an office in Toronto. And again, it's the same idea. Hundreds to hundreds of thousands of documents are being reviewed in the course of due diligence for mergers, acquisitions, and other sorts of corporate transactions. We're also seeing artificial intelligence being used in the courts and outside of the courts. So for example, in tax law, we're seeing CRA lawyers as well as tax litigators using software for predictive analysis. So they'll enter certain parameters to help them determine the outcome of their case. The interesting thing with that is, depending on who you're talking to, whether it's a CRA lawyer or a tax litigator, you're going to come out with you're going to have a different outcome depending on the parameters that you're entering. We're also seeing it being used in family law for uncontested divorces. I believe the program is called This Too, and it's only being used in Ontario right now. But the point is to help individuals with a very simplified divorce process. If they're not able to come to a conclusion, they're advised to go and seek a mediator. And we're also seeing it being used in immigration as well. We know that the government of Canada is working on 2 pilot projects to process temporary visa applications from Chinese and Indian applicants. And at the end of the day, you still have an immigration officer who is reviewing these applications. And we're also looking at, or the government is looking at, using artificial intelligence to process compassionate leave or compassionate applications from different applicants as well. So again, we're looking at a human being playing a role in looking at the ultimate outcome. I did also want to talk really briefly about a case that came out in, I want to say it was March or April of this year. It's called Ewert versus Canada. And it's not specifically dealing with the use of artificial intelligence, but it goes back to this importance of the quality of data. So in Ewert versus Canada, there was a man, Mr. Ewert, he's a Métis Canadian, who was convicted in the mid-'80s for the murder and attempted murder of 2 individuals. And he's serving 2 concurrent, or I guess simultaneous lifetime sentences. And so he wanted to challenge, and he was successful in challenging the government for the use of certain psychological and actuarial risk assessments that use data that did not consider his status as an Indigenous person. And it was really interesting in that case because the act that governs the Correctional Services of Canada actually builds in protection for the consideration of Indigenous individuals and ethnic and cultural practices of people that are not white, right? Or just not the predominant population. And so the Supreme Court actually sided with Mr. Ewert and held that, you know, if we're going to use certain risk assessment tools, which are also employed in the use of artificial intelligence, we need to consider other factors. We need to consider the gender bias. We need to consider the racial bias. And so it was important in that case that it's important for that case that we need to start thinking about the use and the quality of the data that we're using in artificial intelligence. So yeah, that's how we're seeing it now in the legal profession.
That's great. That's a very important perspective, and thanks for bringing that to us. Sunil, I apologize because the language comes out of the Trump administration. But there's talk about, but I like the language, which is this idea of getting out of the geek ghetto. So what's meant by that is we've got huge demand for workers, skilled workers in AI on the technical side, but increasingly so we need more policy. We need more legal expertise to guide us through this. Are you seeing, what are you seeing in terms of the kind of new, you know, as this technology is deployed and the need for regulations and laws, balance, in your academic work, are you seeing kind of that dichotomy emerging of, you know, the technical capacity is needed, but at the end of the day, because of some of the limitations, as well as, you know, to steer some of the advantages that, you know, we need some policy?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all kind of green fields policy space. People are still thinking through all of these issues, but where you're seeing it kind of at the bleeding edge is in areas like weapons deployment, for example. People are realizing very quickly that the technology is very good already in terms of autonomous weapons deployment. We need to think about the ethics of that right now. We can't wait 5 years and let that sort itself out. Whereas if we're thinking about lawyers and looking at e-discovery, I mean, it's not a life or death situation. If McCarthy Tetra wants to develop technology to look at documents, great. We don't really need the government to kind of step in and look at the ethics of that necessarily right now. And I mean, I think that's a big part of the story here is that, I mean, there's a lot of hype around AI, but in terms of how it's actually playing out in a lot of sectors, it's still very, very early days. I mean, we've seen much more impacts from automation generally, so kind of robotics and other investments in technology over the last 15 years in the labor market in Canada than we have from AI. I mean, it's really hard to point to specific sectors and say X amount of jobs have been lost or changed or added as a result of AI currently. I mean, we've kind of got anecdotal stories around that. So, I mean, Goldman Sachs in the early part of the century, for example, they had 600 U.S. equity trade or currency traders in their New York desk. They now have 2 people doing that job, and they have 200 software engineers supporting the systems that are doing the jobs of those people. And part of the reason is it's expensive, right? So I mean, it's the Goldman Sachs of the world, it's the RBCs of the world who can invest in this technology right now. It's not affordable enough for the average mom and pop small medium enterprise, which comprise 97% of the economy or whatever it is, to go out and buy an off-the-shelf AI system that's going to take over key business functions for them. So I think we're still at the early stages. Governments are starting to grapple with the notion that we do need some regulation, we do need some guidance, particularly around data usage here. I mean, in Canada, there's a huge kind of dichotomy between our privacy. We value it very much when it comes to our data, especially on the health side, but that kind of pulls against the imperative to have open data sets that these algorithms can learn from and can build upon. So if you compare Canada's political and legal context to China's, in a lot of ways, they're actually going to be much further ahead when it comes to accessing and using data sets than we are. And there are good reasons for that, and we have a lot of kind of moral imperatives for protecting our private data. But I think push is going to come to shove at a certain point where we realize if we really want to move ahead in some of these spaces, we're going to have to get smarter about anonymizing certain kinds of data, letting companies or the public sector use that data to build algorithms that can lead us forward in terms of innovation and productivity. I think we're still kind of at the very early stages of that. Now, most of the conversations governments are having are on the skills training, retraining side. So if people get disrupted out of jobs, how do we train them for new jobs? It hasn't really shifted at a very granular level, I would say, to kind of those more specific issues around data governance and things like that.
Okay, perfect. So and thanks for that. So we've talked about what AI is. For some context, we talked about the socioeconomic side. We've talked about kind of what the policy and legal ramifications are. So now it's time for a less scripted discussion on how are we going to, what is the future of employment look like, and how are we as a country going to shift. So on the one hand, there's the change in the way we work. There's things like the gig economy, or what impact does this have on childcare? What impact does this have on health benefits and pensions? We had jobs for life not long ago. That's no longer the case. We have the educational component that Steve mentioned, which is extremely important, and I see some universities addressing that heavily to get job-ready people out there. So maybe I'll put it to Steve to kind of start this discussion off on the educational side and what you see we need to do.
I mean, going back to my original comments on, definitely we see that there's a need, and this is not unique to Canada, but to start young with K-12 computer science education and to make sure that that's introduced. And as I said as well, experiential learning and co-op for post-secondary. But actually, one thing that I'd like to talk about in a question that touches on, I think, basically everything that everyone's raised is, what is the impact of automation, and particularly at Amazon? We look at AI and automation primarily, how can it improve our customers' lives and the products and services that we sell to our customers, and as well as our employees. We have over 600,000 employees globally, so this is something that we're always paying close attention to. And one really interesting thing that I love to see every time I go there is in Brampton, so about 40 minutes from here. We have we have 4 what we call fulfillment centers or warehouses in the GTA here, and one of them in Brampton is a robotic fulfillment center. And I say that to people, and most of them say, "Oh, so you don't have anybody working there, huh?" And quite actually entirely opposite. It is by far our largest fulfillment center in Canada in terms of workforce. And that's because the robots that we use, and they look like giant Roomba vacuums. You can go on YouTube and watch a video of it. We've automated the inefficient process of our fulfillment centers. If you go to one of our older fulfillment centers, there's long aisles of what we call racking, of products just on shelves, and people walk up and down and pick the items. People are really good, and they have the judgment, but it's inefficient because they spend most of their day walking as opposed to picking the item. What we've automated is the robot brings this rack to you. It's a tower of shelving, and it brings it to what we call the picker. And then I forget who it was, but talked about the high judgment roles. The picker then picks the right product off. There might be 100 products on the shelf, and they pick the right one off. That automation, taking out the walking and the efficiency with which we can bring products, means that we need so many more employees working at that fulfillment center. On the inbound side, to be unloading the trucks coming in and putting those products on the shelves, and then on the outbound side, taking those, after the picker takes it, it goes down a conveyor belt. They have to put it in the box, tape the box, put it down the line, put it in the truck, pack the truck up. You need so many more people because the volume's so much higher because we can be so much more efficient and faster. So it's really changed the nature of the work, but created more jobs. There's more efficiency, more productivity. These are the most productive fulfillment centers. So I think that's how we look at it. It's a really interesting thing to come see, and I do encourage people to Google an Amazon robotic fulfillment center. And it's provided good skill training for our associates that work there as well. They're interacting with technology. It's something that we can teach them, that we can reskill to work with these robots. But then if they take that to go somewhere else, they have that experience now. They've worked with in this really high-tech environment as well.
Regan.
So there's been a lot of really interesting comments here that I want to touch on, and Steve, I want to talk a little bit about the work you guys do. I think the thing that we need to remember, though, and there's some people in technology here, there's a central banker, there's a blue-collar person, there's a policy person, lawyer, is technology serves humans, not the other way around. And we have to think, and IBM has a corporate view on this, and I share it, obviously, which would be that technology enables people. And the idea that we are somehow beholden to this evolution where autonomous vehicles, for example, is coming up. There's, 800,000 people in Canada who are involved in transportation in some way, shape, or form. And with autonomous vehicles, and I'm looking at my central banking friend here, if we displaced 800,000 workers over a period of 3, 4, 5 years, what impact would that have on the Canadian economy? Probably pretty significant, I would think, not to mention the social unrest, where people who are used to driving a truck or driving a taxi and are no longer doing that because there's a machine doing it. There's like big questions to think about that, to Sunil's point, which is the income disparities are huge. And we think about, as Canadians and as technologists, Steve and I, for example, we think about how do we use technology, make it better, make workplaces more efficient. But we should think about the human element on the other side of that. So, Steve, when you talk about your fulfillment centers, I totally accept that. But I think about the retail sector in Canada, which has 1.2 million, 1.3 million people working in it. And as the shift for shopping goes online, there's a whole bunch of people who are going to be displaced by that type of consumer behavior. That's not to say Amazon is a bad actor, but if you have more people using an online service and less people going to Loblaws, right, but that goes back to what is technology for? Does it serve us or do we serve it? There's some real policy questions there that I think we haven't really discussed as a society as much as we should. The transportation one in particular is quite, I think, prevalent because are you going to teach a truck driver how to code? Probably not, right? You could, but you're not going to take all 800,000 drivers, pardon me, and turn them into programmers. As important as programming is, our economy is diverse. It involves people who have a variety of skills, and I think we have to talk about these issues as a country, and then as companies we have to respond. One of the things that has come up is bias in AI, and that's something we think a lot about and spend a lot of time researching, and we think that's an area that governments have a role to play. For sure. We also think AI and algorithms should be able to demonstrate how they arrived at a conclusion. We're used to it as consumers, right? We just get an answer. But if you think back, there's a whole series of steps that were involved in getting there. And this is just sort of the basics of searching on Google or using Amazon or whatever. But there's some other big questions like AI in healthcare. And if AI is going to augment the work of a physician, how does that AI machine help a physician do his or her job? And what is the linearity involved in that algorithm getting from data input, which you talked about, to output? So I'll just say education is part of it, but there's it's a much bigger macro question that there's going to be whole sections of the economy that are completely displaced if things keep going the way they are. And there's lots of examples in history when large sects of the population are displaced and what happens to countries and economies when that occurs, that we need to have a grown-up conversation about.
Yeah, so that's great, and that's the meat of the discussion I think we wanted to get into. I will, provide one perspective, and that's when I was talking to the truck drivers, and I was kind of nervous about talking to them because I thought they're really not going to like me because of my, AI work. And do you know what they said? They said, no, we're the fastest adopters because there's a lot more to a truck driver than driving a truck. And it actually frees them up. A lot of these lane guidance and a lot of these kinds of things actually causes a lot of safety and helps them not to worry about some things and worry about other things that provide more value to the business. But this is really good. This is where I want to go. So Sunil.
Just maybe 3 very quick provocations. I mean, I like Amazon. Well, my wife likes Amazon, so I come home and I have to recycle about 100 boxes every week, which I don't enjoy. But I mean, you mentioned the 600,000 global employees. I mean, I think the median wage of those employees is $31,000. So the question becomes not, are we creating jobs? So what's the quality of these jobs? And there are also tax revenue implications for a country like Canada, where Amazon is largely exempt from our tax reach, and we're not getting nearly as much tax revenue as we would like. So if we're talking then about funding skills training for workers who are displaced by technologies, where are we getting that revenue if Amazon, Google, Facebook are deriving huge value from data from Ontarians, from Canadians, but we're not getting any tax revenue from that? Then second point, to Regan's question, I mean, there's also a fundamental disconnect between what we want as consumers and what we want as citizens. So as a consumer, I love Amazon. It's quick, it's immediate, I get what I want. I don't have to go and mix with people at a store, which I, as somebody who don't like talking to people, I love that. But as a citizen, that's a problem, right? I mean, if I look around in 5 or 10 years and think, what happened to the streets in Toronto, which used to be vibrant and have the local mom and pop stores and employ the local people? Where are they all? Guess what? They're gone because Amazon and other companies like it, I'm not picking on Amazon, bankrupted those. Oh, you're picking on Amazon. Just because they didn't give us HQ2. Otherwise, I would have been very happy with all this. Yeah. And then the third general point is, I mean, it comes down to, again, social supports. I mean, employment insurance in Canada, right now, if you're unemployed in Canada, fewer than 40% of unemployed Canadians actually are eligible for EI. That number was over 80% in the late 1970s. We spend far less than most other advanced economies on social spending. We're 25th out of 35 OECD countries on taxation rates. So if we want to have a... Well, you may think that until you're out of a job and then you are looking for skills training or affordable housing. And again, it's easy for somebody in this room, I would say, to say, thank God, but I'm talking about the 20, 30, 40% of the population who aren't making $80,000, $100,000, $150,000 a year. So I mean, for me, it's great. Hey, I'd rather pay more taxes and help people who need affordable housing and need affordable childcare. So I mean, it's easy to say thank God, but again, that's kind of that short-termism, which in the end is going to bite us in the butt, because I mean, 58% of economic growth is driven by consumer spending. If we don't have enough consumers driving the economy forward, we're not going to be getting anywhere. I mean, inclusive economies are the future, and right now we're not at that stage. So just some general provocations to throw out.
Tim.
Yeah, I wanted to say a couple of things about the labor market, and I guess one point to make is that the labor market and the adoption of all these technologies is really a two-way relationship. I mean, the labor market also affects the incentives. I mean, it affects the economics of adoption. And you know, when we go out and talk to businesses, we get the sense that, you know, first of all, that you know, that some businesses are you know, they're finding it's difficult to hire certain skills. I mean, there are shortages of truck drivers, for that matter, and they're thinking, well, we should maybe we should look at IT, look at AI or some other sorts of solutions in order to be able to fulfill this need. On the other hand, of course, they're short of some of the IT skills that they need in order to do that. And you talk to some companies and they're saying, well, I mean, our IT guys just left to work for some new startup company, and we can't actually incorporate some of the things we'd like to. And so the labor market very much is I mean, it can be a driver, but it can also be a constraint on the speed at which this goes through the economy. I think that just because a lot of these IT skills are in relatively short supply, that is probably going to put a brake on how rapidly we see some of these things adopted. The other thing, though, of course, the other direction, I mean, of course, you know, as other panelists have stressed, I mean, it does potentially have a big effect on the labor market, but I think often in pretty subtle ways. And we've seen previous waves of technology which have you know, created more jobs than they've destroyed. I mean, one example is when ATMs came in the banking industry, and there, of course, bank tellers. I mean, the prediction would be, well, you know, now you don't need bank tellers to count out all that money for people, and so there aren't going to be as many jobs in banking. But in fact, the opposite happened, because the tellers weren't dispensing cash, they were doing all kinds of other stuff, you know, selling other financial services. And the skills that were required were actually quite different. There was less a sort of, you know, the skills involved in accurately, you know, counting banknotes and all that sort of stuff, but it was more the sort of interpersonal skills and so on. And that comes, of course, to the educational requirements. It's not just about, like, we need lots more people who can write code, but it's actually a lot of other things. And to some extent, I think it's the fact we need the educational system to promote the kind of versatility that means that people can actually adapt and learn new things, not just train for one occupation, but actually be prepared for a world where they may have to change occupations throughout their lifetime. And I think the other thing is that it's going to be a hugely increased emphasis on lifelong learning, and I think to avoid precisely the outcome that, and we're very much, you know, I very much sympathize with the points that Sunil made, you know, the sense that this could be a driver of huge inequality. You could have people marginalized and displaced, and to avoid that outcome, we really need to ensure that that people can adapt as life goes on. And that doesn't mean necessarily going from being truck drivers to being IT specialists, but it means actually finding a whole range of other occupations that actually can make very good use of their skills, and those could be either white or blue collar jobs.
So I'm going to go to Steve now, and then Fouad.
Don't you forget me, dude.
You're there.
I'm coming.
I know you are. I'm just working up to you.
I'll be quick. Just 2 points. Just, you know, in response to some of the discussion first, and as you raised with ATMs, that's the classic example. I mean, we're sitting in a bank vault now. I think you can think about this used to be a bank with a hub of people coming in and out. And technology changed that, and now people like Rodney in the financial services sector have jobs. Like it's shifted it, and it's created this huge payments sector where people are innovating. And yeah, their jobs are going to shift, and there's, you know, we don't have lamplighters anymore. Things change, but new jobs are created, and I think there's very valid questions about what are those types of jobs. And you know, we offer all sorts of jobs with Amazon. You can work in a fulfillment center. You can work at a development center. You know, it's pretty wide ranging. Just quickly on the retail side, you know, what some people don't realize is if you go on Amazon, about half the stuff that you see is not being sold by Amazon. It's being sold by what we call our third-party sellers. And these are largely small businesses who use Amazon or might use other online stores to sell their stuff. And so they're reaching a broader audience of customers. They're able to sell anywhere in the world. They're able to export. It's a shift. What's going to happen to brick and mortar retail? I think there's always a role for that to play, and it'll always be there. But it is kind of shifting how it works. But you can be a Canadian small business in rural Ontario, and you can ship to customers throughout Canada, throughout the U.S., throughout the world. So I think it's just looking at it that way. Technology is enabling more jobs, creating more commerce that way.
Yeah, I'll just add to that briefly. I think we're in a situation where our government, federal government, is putting diversity and Indigenous peoples front and center. For many Indigenous peoples that just don't want to leave their communities, which is reasonable, to enter the labor market, it's those kinds of platforms that allow them to do that. So, Fawad, if I could.
Just building on the point around how jobs are changing, when we talk to boards and executive suites, the biggest role that they're looking for, you can call it all kinds of things, is a translator. Somebody who gets both sides of the fence, who understands the business as well as the technology. I mean, that's just thinking today, going beyond the developers, the architects, et cetera. But if we just go further out a few years from now, and we think about leadership and what competencies we look for, just as an example, empathy is one of the things that we look for, in leaders. And I asked my, Uber driver or Lyft, how does it feel that an app is controlling your day-to-day? And they're like, well, over the years, we teach empathy to our supervisors. We say, we think that's an important aspect of it. But technology somewhat removes it. So if you think about future roles, maybe there's going to be an empathy auditor to see if an organization has enough of empathy as part of their leadership suite. And so just, there are roles that we haven't even imagined, that are going to come up, as we move forward.
So Mandy, it's time for you to rock. One thing I would like at the tail end or whatever is, why can't we get more women involved? And but that may not be where you want to start. But if that's something if you could add on to that, to your comments, that'd be great.
Well, I just think it's amazing when you put a group of us up here on these very uncomfortable chairs and see what happens. I don't know. I can see you breathing it out, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to lose my belt here in a second. But I think it's very interesting that you hear key words come out of the panel out here, and you see different, I think different perspectives come out because we're all in different areas of the economy. And I love the data collection, and I love the policy and ethics. And and then we're talking about, what the hell was his name again, Winston? Whatever. And then we talk about empathy, and you look at the industry that I'm in, and I'm going to touch on the women in a minute, is that you look at someone like me, is that at the end of the day, and then we're going to talk about efficiency, my young man, is that at the end of the day, right now, what people don't really understand is that we have not just a tiny, but a systemic skilled trade shortage in Canada and throughout the world. It's systemic. When you look at your biggest financial ability to make money, hold on to ability, and maybe even retire is in your home in Canada, who are you going to call? You need to buckle up, Buttercup, because it's going to get a lot worse. And I'll tell you why. When we talk about potential in human beings, we've missed that. We've gone right to AI. To your point, my love, efficiencies, there are things that human beings truly are not picking up on. Why? Because we're emotional. We have children, we have sick parents, we have things going on, and we miss things. It's a coat check, is what it is. And so my point here is when we're talking about women, when I talk to people around North America, I look at the boys and I say, I love you, man, but listen up. The issue is that most women put in a half a day before they even go out the front door. Whether it be physical, emotional, you name it. And so you ask yourself, why would a woman want to come into the skilled trade industry when she's already tired? And so this is the issue, is that I built this company with 60% of my company being women. And I haven't hired them because I'm trying to check a box. I've hired them because they make me money. Because they're amazing. But what do? I bring out their potential. Because they're able to do most things that most human beings, and I can tell you that robots will never do. And so the point is that what I do, my love, is I show up with items that prove to be efficient on their bodies, their minds, and the progression of an industry that's never allowed them in the front door. And so for that, I look at everybody around here and I say, let's help each other, because let's stop going to the top of the mountain and let's just camp on the side and eat beans and drink beer for a while and figure out what we're doing before we go up there. Because we have a whole group. You talk about the truck drivers? There's something to be said for sophistication in human beings that a computer will never pick up on. I've watched it, I've seen it. I looked at these kids today and I said, listen, other than you being almost buck naked, sitting on a cloud, everything that you walk on, everything that you talk on, everything that you eat, everything that you soap your body with, everything that wipes the soap off your body was made by the blue-collar industry. Everything that you wear, everything that you talk in, everything, the guy that's filming us right now are people that are in this industry that absolutely cultivate how we live every day. But is anybody talking about that? No. They're second-class citizens. AI is cool. Robots are cool. I'm fighting this because I'm telling you that companies like mine, people like Mandy Ranahan, more of us need to be in the industries that are not transparent, that rip off consumers. Why? Because they've been allowed to. Can I replace those people that rip you off in your home? I can't, my sweet, because there's nobody to replace them. So I'm saying that let's, before we go to C, how about we go back to A for a little bit and work together? Because I'm telling you right now that a company like mine turned away almost $20 million in the last 2 years in work because I didn't have the people. And so I'm saying the education and training is what we need to give to human beings before we put it into somebody who doesn't give a shit, which would be Jeremy. Exactly. Woo!
Excellent. Well put. Well put.
I told you to come back to me. I'm ready.
All right, so we're going to go to the audience now, and go for a little Q&A. I see a gentleman in the back there.
Oh, hi. So question, I guess it's kind of a compound question, a bit to Steve, who mentioned about the lack of engineers in the AI field, and I kind of want to counter that to almost maybe there's too many, and maybe, you know, a need of like psychologists, anthropologists, sociologists, educators, artists even, and that kind of communication, because you know, this idea of artificial intelligence, augmented intelligence, purely being from a space that, you know, still is predominantly male, still like, you know, a cost to, like, you know, affording to be able to become an engineer. There's just so much else from the world that kind of needs to go into that field. I mean, look at like what was Microsoft's Titania AI bot, and just like, you know, or like even the algorithms that kind of dictate YouTube recommendations. Like if there was more, you know, actual knowledge of and these skills that are still out there and still useful going into this field that is almost in a way trying to get rid of those fields. You know, maybe it would be more of a benefit to us all. And so the other kind of flip side of that is the worry that maybe, you know, the rise of AI and all this may create this kind of useless class of people who either don't want to learn how to code or be a part of that AI field, or just can't. I don't know who to direct that to exactly. Go.
I think you raised some excellent points, and yeah, not mutually exclusive things that we do need engineers to compete in the future of work, but you also need people who have these social skills and empathy. And I mean, I'm a political science major, so but I also did some coding when I was little. And I think that's kind of how I look at it. When we're talking about K to 12, we want to introduce it. We think that every student should have a core set of computer science skills. And then you will see more that go on to become engineers or in related fields. But even the psychology majors and the artists, I think they need to have that background, because if you're going to be a psychology major that's going to be working with AI companies or technology companies, you need to have an understanding of how that works. So I think just like we all have a baseline in math and history and chemistry, like I think we all need to have a baseline in CS going forward. And I mean, Amazon hires all sorts of people. Most of them, I mean, the biggest clump is going to be engineers, but there's just about a job for everyone at Amazon, depending on what your background is. And it's a very diverse place where we do have that same idea that we want to bring people together that come from different backgrounds. And you often get people who are engineers that have a degree or strong interest in the field that you mentioned.
I would rather people learn Latin or Greek than computer science in school, quite honestly. I mean, computer programming is going to be very easy to automate in 5 to 10 years. I'm not saying we shouldn't expose kids to it. It's not, obviously it's going to be important, but if Canada's doubling down on, we're going to train kids in computer science, again, China and India are going to produce more tertiary grads, so university grads, than we have Canadians, period, per year, every single year. So if we think we're going to compete with them on computer science on a numbers game, we're not. I would much rather we give people broad-based approaches to education. We teach them how to fail, we teach them adaptability, we teach them empathy. And hey, great, a little computer science is great, but if we're kind of focusing that on that as the silver bullet that's going to rescue us, then I think we're in a huge amount of trouble.
Resilience.
Yeah, I was just thinking that one.
Yeah, sure you were.
Anybody else want to tackle that one? No? Any other questions?
Oh, lots.
My job didn't exist when I was in high school. I'm in the technology field. My son came to me, 16, said, what should I do when I grow up? I want to be successful. And I said, my job didn't exist. I don't know what your job is going to be. Do everything, be everything. And he goes, well, if you were to crystal ball it, what would it be? And I said, electrician. And he looked at me. What the hell are you talking about? I said, what do you think's running all of this stuff? Become an electrician, become a plumber. You want to really do something different? Become an electrical engineer. Whatever it may be, because all of this infrastructure needs something, and that's something that Ontario is lagging behind. Our infrastructure costs are through the roof. It's going to Quebec. So from a Canadian perspective, we're getting stuff because Quebec's got great hydro rates, but we don't have it in Ontario. Canada, lousy mobile rates. 50% of the internet is now mobile, and we have some of the worst OECD numbers on mobile. So we have a lot of things to improve for my son to be a successful electrician, and he will probably enjoy that. What it came back to was you talked about computer science, and there's a gap right now. 16, can't get a job. Why? He's been automated out of a job. That teller at McDonald's is now automated. He can't get even the most basic, no qualifications job, and that's across the board for kids in high school before they go to university or college or whatever the case may be. That is a real problem for our sector, for Canada. It's the first part to it. The second part is life skills are now missing. Kids don't understand basic life skills because it's not as important. Handwriting isn't as important as computer science. I'm computer science. But they've stopped teaching how to do cursory handwriting. What does that mean? They lose their motor skills. What does that mean? They can't actually do things with their hands anymore in the same ways, because something that was just cute earlier on, cursory, actually helps define them as they grow up. These life skills are critical. And we have to keep that in mind when we're looking at technology, that we're not eroding some basic functions.
Yeah.
Great point.
Beans and beer.
Great point. It reminds me of a report that came out this week about surgeons in Europe sort of sending the alarm about students not being able to use their hands anymore. Students not being able to use their hands anymore, as a surgeon could. Yes, sir.
Yes. I'd like to get a sense, what you think is happening from an organizational perspective around the evolution of the, the manager, sort of the command and control type traditional management role to more of a coaching type evolution as we address these issues that you've raised, which I think are very significant, about having people being adaptable and flexible, and who's going to facilitate with that within the organization. And I know there seems to be this push now that the CHRO is going to be much more important than they have been in past. The triumvirate will be the CIO, the CEO, and the CHRO. And I'm wondering what your feeling about that. Is that actually happening, and are organizations starting to recognize managers in a different role than traditionally?
It's a fantastic question.
Certainly. So you raised a really good point around the CHROs. We're seeing that more and more. Even in my prior career, which was in management consulting, I started seeing, when we did mergers and acquisitions, we'd see the CHRO at the table with the CFO and the CEO, which was kind of new. Typically, the CHROs are back at the office, because people integration is becoming more and more important than the technology in itself. And as we move forward, if you look at the Amazon, the Apple, the Google, it's not their technology that's expensive. It's the people that are very expensive. And I fail to recall whether it was Google or Facebook that said, pay people unfairly. If someone is creating 10x the value, you got to pay them 10x the value, because if they leave, you lose that amount of value. You got to pay them that way. So there's the way management used to think. If you think about Jack Welch and the psychology of the performance measurement and this ginormous company, that's going away. We're seeing more and more of pods and letting people incubate elements, and all of that creates a lot of complexity in running an organization, which makes the CHRO role way more important than it was in the past.
Regan?
I would just add from our perspective, so I lead a national team, people work across the country, and IBM was one of the first companies to have remote work. People work from home, and now it's kind of a thing people accept as a sort of minimum standard. And we did the work from home thing like in the 90s. Somebody talked about pensions. IBM got rid of its defined pension plan in 1992. So we've been at the forefront of doing these kinds of things. But we can work from home, so it's good. But we're actually in Canada on a push now to bring people back to the office, because we have found as leaders, and I love the term coaching. This is actually what we use internally. We talk about leading and coaching. We don't talk about managing, and vernacular is actually really important. So we're bringing more people back to the office, even if technologists are working with folks in India, and we have a big chunk of our employees are based in India. We want them in the office working with their colleagues, because there's a secret sauce that you lose when everybody's remote. So from a coaching perspective, those are some of the steps that we're taking is to bring people back. Obviously, flexible work arrangements, all the rest of that stuff we continue to do. I think the other point that I wanted to make is actually in reference to Hillary's role as the Chief Digital Officer. I think you're starting to see organizations, that's for Ontario, but lots of organizations are defining specific leadership roles, and from that platform, hopefully those leaders are drawing it back to people. So the digital discussion you talked about earlier, which the users first, or think like a user. I'm not sure what the button says, I can't see it from here, but that focus actually is permeated right across the C-suite of any organization: marketing, digital, HR, even finance. And so I think as organizations evolve, if you think about org structure, it's from the military actually is how organizations historically have gotten their structure. So I don't think that's going away, but the focus and the empowerment of leaders at the top of organizations to then manage down and coach down is something that we see, at least in our organization, that really is putting people first, and there's an evolution of that conversation.
Can I just throw out, I have joked that, I guess it's a joke, but I've joked that instead of Chief Digital Officer, my role really should be Chief Empathy Officer.
Yeah.
And that really is half of my role when it comes to digital transformation, when it comes to how I interact with my peers and other senior leaders across the organization. That is my job.
Empathy and diplomacy.
That's
right? Chief Digital Officer is the chief diplomat, and we see that in clients all the time, where we're doing transformational projects, whether it's public sector or the private sector, where the folks who are impacted by whether it's an HR transformation or something else, the people component, empathy, diplomacy is a big part of that. But management and the structure of management has evolved, and the roles have been created. I mean, years ago, the idea of a chief digital officer wouldn't have existed, but it does now through technology, and that person in smart organizations has a stake at the table that will help the organization move along in their own journey.
All right, so we got 2 more questions. There's, I think, alcohol, so I don't want to hold anybody back from that, and it's cold and we're Canadian.
Do I have one?
Yes.
May I?
Hey.
Afternoon, and I want to thank, because you guys were outstanding tonight. Outstanding job you guys did. It's kind of directed more at Timothy Lane.
Yeah.
Only because you're part of the Bank of Canada, so there's a lot of you guys up here that are part of the government, which is great, it's fantastic. And all of your opinions are very important. But how does the Bank of Canada move forward with AI, which is what I think is a very important part? Okay, with society and cryptocurrency, and like there's a lot of those gray areas that we don't understand, that we would like an opinion on. And how do we as Canadians become part of that AI group, right? So as being part of the world with respect to going forward, and how does that integrate with all of our everyday life? Just simplifying it.
Okay, well, yeah, thanks for that question. I mean, obviously, there are 2 pieces of it. One piece is really, as part of our responsibility to keep the Canadian economy on an even keel. We have to understand the forces that are driving economic growth in Canada, and AI, along with all these other technological changes, are very important in that process. We're not seeing them in the numbers yet, but we believe we will see changes in the way the economy works as these technological changes work their way through. And so that we have a group within the Bank of Canada that's studying these changes. We have we're looking at also in particular at financial technology and how it may be changing the financial system. You referred to cryptocurrencies. That's certainly one thing that we've been looking at. I mean, at this point, we see that as being something that is largely providing assets that people can speculate on, and which in some cases, though may serve other purposes of raising funding for certain companies and so on, but it's something that we're, of course, watching as part of our general mandate to safeguard the stability of the Canadian financial system. Now, the other piece of it is that we're looking, of course, at how we can incorporate technology in our own operations, and so we've recently announced something called the Project Pivot, which involves identifying certain areas where we think there might be potential to apply technology to our own activities, and inviting companies to submit proposals to partner with us in developing applications that could be relevant to our operations. And so that's something that really serves 2 functions. It's partly the fact that that it could be seriously useful and could help us do things better and help us serve Canadians better. But it could also, it also just the process of thinking about those things, I think, is really useful for us, because it helps us get our hands dirty and explain, to understand a bit more intimately how these things are working, and just to understand maybe a bit more by introspection how businesses are thinking about these things too.
Go ahead,
If
Dave.
I may add to Tim's point, cryptocurrencies, it's important to note that there is a distinction between like cryptocurrencies, fintech, and artificial intelligence. They're two very different groups. Blockchain, I'm still learning what that is.
You mentioned 3 points.
Sorry?
You mentioned 3 points. You said there's cryptocurrencies.
Well, cryptocurrency would sort of fall under like the financial technology spectrum, and then we've got like artificial intelligence, natural language processing, all of those. Like artificial intelligence is an umbrella term for other types of like machine learning. But in any case, like financial technology, the fintech sector is actually regulated. Artificial intelligence in Canada is not regulated, and that's a really big concern because we're having all of these great conversations, but we don't really have policy in place to help govern how Canadians are able to operate. So that's just to add to Tim's point. Tim, can I call you Tim?
Sure.
Tim, okay. Because I know sometimes
Tim, I wasn't trying to beat up on you,
but
I was only asking because you're the guy who we all go to for direction, right? So I was only asking.
Okay,
So yeah, so we've got like Canadian regulations, but there's also international regulations for that. That's just something to add.
I would just add, as an AI producing organization, we actually believe in regulation, and we're at the table with non-government organizations and standards organizations that that are working towards a national and international standard because it's the right thing to do.
So I apologize for all those that had their hands up in advance and were going to ask questions, but we've run out of time. We've had a great discussion. I really like augmented reality. I really like empathy being introduced to the discussion. It's been great context, and I really appreciate all your tremendous expertise and insight. So thank you, and round of applause.
So I am Lynn Hamilton. I am the president of the Internet Society Canada chapter. Thank you so much for coming to our inaugural Toronto event. If you would like to take part in more fantastic conversations that we have like now, please consider joining a member. You can come, becoming a member, you can come to me. I will size you for your skull ring. I will, introduce some of the numerous hazing activities that we get involved in. No, please come, become a member of our little merry band. We are 200 sort of thought leaders across Canada, really interesting, having these kinds of big discussions, hard discussions, right? Like, this is not easy stuff. We're not going to fix it today, but the more we talk about it, the more we know. I mean, everybody gets a little bit smarter. That's why I'm here. So please, if you haven't had your question answered, please take it up at the bar for the next little while, and all of our panelists will be here, and you can very informally have it. So please, thank you very much. And thank you, Jeremy, for moderating.